play the game, and I thought it would be a cool thing to do by telling you a true crime story. Was warn people there is triggers in the story which involve the elderly and other stuff that might offend people. If you don't want to watch it, see you in the next video. Another disclaimer, I mean no offence whatsoever to anyone in this story, and I respect everyone. All the information I have found is from internet and books that I've read. So let's get into it. Now, this story revolves around a serial killer called John Bob King Adams, aka Dr. Death. His statistics so far, his number of victims were from 0 to 163 plus victims. He committed his murders between 1935 and 1956.
Do check out the entire
Dr. Adams was arrested in 19th of December 1956. His victims were elderly female patients. His method was poisoning. Right, and this all took place in Eastbourne, East Sussex, England, UK. And a bit of a background on him. He was born in Plymouth, Bournemouth, and I can't pronounce that, but it was an island. It's an island. His family was very religious. His family was very religious. His father was a watchmaker and he was a preacher in his local congregate. But John's father died of a stroke in 1914, and John had a younger brother who was called William, but he died in 1918 during the influenza pandemic. John spent a few years attending Corn Academy Institute. He also went to the Queen's University of Belfast. His teacher said he was a loner and a plodder. He graduated in 1921 and he was offered a position as assistant houseman at the Bristol Royal Infirmary by Surgeon Arthur Redhill Short. this didn't last long. A year later, he applied for a job as a GP in praxis located in Eastbourne. In the middle of the 1930s, he started getting attention. Also, suspicions started about Mr. Adams, which were perceived as well, in 1935, a patient of John's, Mildred Watson, sorry if I pronounced the names wrong, had left him £7,385 in her will, but her family contested it as they thought it was a large amount of money at the time, and the will was upheld in court. In 1941, John Adams got the diploma of anesthesics. He started working 1 day a week at the local hospital. His nickname was Bagel because he would eat food, count his money, and then would also fall asleep during operations. He would even mix up the tubes of the anesthetic gas, and his patients would turn blue or even wake up in the middle of an operation. Even though he messed up a lot, Dr. John Adams' career was somewhat successful, which made him wealthy, but it didn't last long. In 1956, his strange behaviour was reported to the police by Leslie Harrison after his friend Gertrude Halter died unexpectedly under Dr. John Adams' care. But by this time, Dr. Adams had been made a beneficiary of 132 wills of his patients, and of course rumours were going around about the number of deaths of his patients. Sorry, it seems to be like I'm lagging telling the story, but I'm trying to do this and sort of try to give you a good story. So on the 17th of August 1956, the Metropolitan Police Murder Squad took over the investigation. There was 2 detectives were assigned to the case, and they were called Detective Superintendent Herbert and Scotland Yard, and Detective Sergeant Charles. Their focus only on cases from 1946 and 1956, which had 310 death certificates which were written by Dr. Adams. Only 163 of them were thought to be suspicious. As the investigation continued, they interviewed nurses who had been involved with the patient's treatment. Some had stated that Dr. Adams had given the patient special injections, but he wouldn't say what was in it to the nurse. He would also tell the nurse to leave the room before he would inject the patient with this special medication. So Dr. Adams' house was searched, and on the 24th of November 1956, it was mainly to search for dangerous drugs like morphine, heroin and pethidine. Right. When the doctor told, sorry about that. When the police told Dr. Adams this, he said that there were no drugs or anything like that sort of thing in his home. When he was asked about the drugs record, he told them that he had not kept one since 1949.
Another objective has just landed. I've shared the details with you.
But while searching the house, Dr. Adams was seen removing 2 items from the cupboard. When he thought no one was watching him, the officers asked him about it, where he took 2 bottles of morphine from his pocket and told them they were for 2 of his patients, but they found out one of them had never been prescribed morphine. So where was I? Oh yeah, he said both bottles were prescribed to two of his patients, but it turned out that one of them had never been prescribed morphine. Now his first victim was one Miss Edith Alice Morell. So on the 24th of June 1948, she was a wealthy widow and she suffered a stroke, which left her partially paralysed. But while she was visiting her son in Cheshire, she would be admitted into hospital close by. Her regular doctor was Dr. Adams, and he would come in to visit Edith on the 26th of June 1948, and on the 5th of July he got her transferred back to Eastbourne. So on the 9th of July he started to give her morphine. Then on the 21st of July he then added heroin to the mix. On the 13th of November 1950, Edith Morell sadly died at the age of 81 years old, and her cause of death on her death certificate as a stroke. Dr. Adams was the one who filled in the certificate. Now Edith had removed Dr. Adams from her will on the 13th of September 1950, but after her death her son gifted Dr. Adams her Rolls Royce, a chest of silver cutlery, and he also kept a lamp which belonged to her, and he also billed her estate for a further £1,674, as he claimed he made 1,100 medical visits, but the police found out he only visited her 321 times, and not the 11,000 he had said he had. Second victim was Mrs. Holter. She was also a patient of Dr. Adams, and she was also a widow, as her husband had passed away months earlier. She suffered from depression since. Dr. Adams prescribed her sodium pemphigoid and sodium barbital, but according to Dr. Adams, he had given her 2 tablets to her every morning, and over time reduced her dosage from 2 tablets to 7.5 grams each to 2 tablets to 5 grams. Dr. Adams even received a cheque for £1,000 from Mrs. Hewitt on the 7th of July, which was supposedly so he could buy a new car that her late husband had promised him. Unfortunately, 2 days later, Miss Herbert seemed to have taken
Science is everything. It brought the dinosaurs back from beyond the brink, and it is keeping them here now. I hope you understand how vitally important this is. Oh, I haven't introduced myself. Dr. Kajal Dua. You need to be as passionate about our work as I am. I'll accept no less. The park is coming together, but we can always use more infrastructure. New buildings and upgrades keep us current and ready.
Unfortunately, 2 days later, Miss Herbert seemed to have taken an overdose and fell into a coma. Another doctor saw her in Dr. Adams' absence, and they agreed she had more likely had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. And the next morning, Dr. Adams would contact the coroner to arrange a preventative post-mortem, even though she was still alive. But she would then develop bronchitis, and Miss unfortunately died on the 23rd of July, and she was only 50 years old when she died. But Miss Herbert's death certificate, which Dr. Adams filled out, stated her death was caused by a cerebral hemorrhage, even though the analysis of a urine sample taken from her on the 21st of July would later show she had taken twice the fatal dose of barbiturate in her body. Just 5 days before her supposedly overdose, Miss Herbert had changed her will, where she left Dr. Adams her Rolls-Royce silver drawer, which was worth up to $29,000. He sold the car 6 days before he was arrested. Other possible victims. In August 1939, Agnes Pike was a patient of Dr. Adams. Miss Pike's solicitor was concerned about how much medication that Dr. Adams had given her. So another doctor was asked to take over Pike's care. It was found that there was nothing wrong with her. When he was questioned, he said he'd give Miss Pike the drugs in case she was violent. But the new doctor that the solicitor had hired noted that Dr. Adams had kept Pike away from her family and friends, and they were not allowed to visit her. But under the care of her new doctor, she got her was able to do everyday things like take care of herself, clean the house. Okay, I feel that. So, Emily Louise Mortimer, she died on the 24th of December 1946, and she was 75 years old. After Miss Mortimer died, Dr. Adams took a clock and also a bottle of brandy from her room. He also received money from her will, in which there shares that totaled to £950 in in 1957. 76-year-old Amy Ware, another patient of Dr. Adams, who also banned people from visiting her. Mrs. Ware left Dr. Adams £1,000 in her will, and he put on her cremation form that he wasn't a beneficiary of the will. Annabelle, I cannot pronounce her surname, Kilgour, was 89 years old. Annabelle Kilgour would become a patient of Dr. Adams. He cared for her after she suffered a stroke in July, so Dr. Adams gave her sedative medication on the 24th of December 1950, which she fell into a coma and 4 days later sadly passed away. She also leaves him a clock and £200 in her will. Jeanette Julia Bardem was 85 years old. Julia was also a patient of Dr. Adams. He even talked her into selling her home, leaving the money in her will to anyone she wanted to, while he was caring for Miss Bardem. He was seen holding her hand on the 10th of May 1952. She was up and about doing housework like normal, and on the morning of the 11th of May 1952, Dr. Adams came to see her as she wasn't feeling well, and Dr. Adams gave her an injection of an unknown substance, and she died 3 minutes later. Yet again, he received £661 from her estate, but on her death certificate, Mr. Adams put her cause of death. She had suffered cranial hemorrhage, but when her body was exhumed and re-examined, her body showed no evidence of what Dr. Adams had stated her cause of death was. Julia Thompson. 72-year-old Julia Thompson was another patient of Dr. Adams, and she was being treated for depression. One minute. For depression, and in early November 1952, Dr. Adams gave her a sedative. On the 19th of November, he told her she would feel better in the morning, so in the morning he gave her some medication in tablet form. Unfortunately, she fell into a coma. Dr. Adams told her cook on the 21st of November 1952 that Julia had promised him her typewriter, and he had taken it even though she wasn't dead yet. In the early morning of the 22nd of November 1952, she sadly passed away. Heidi Neal Miller. Heidi Neal Miller was an 86-year-old lady who was a patient of Dr. Adams. She lived with her sister Claire in a guest house when she died under strange circumstances, and Dr. Adams would visit. He would take items from their rooms, and he would also cut them off from their own family. And on the 15th of January 1953, Heidi sadly passed away. Dr. Adams organised a funeral and burial for her. Claire Miller. A year later, Claire Miller, the sister of Heidi, would fall victim too of Dr. Adams, and on a very cold morning of 22nd of February, when a nurse entered her room and found her bedding had been pulled down to the bottom of her bed, her nightgown was pulled up past her chest, and the window was wide open, allowing cold air into the room. Sadly, Claire passed away at the age of 87 years old. Later cause of death was bronchitis. Yet again she left Dr. Adams something in her will, which was £12,075. He also built her estate for a further 700 for her care, and again for him sorting out the funeral. James Brown. He was also, even though I said his victims were all women, they believe there was actually a male victim, James Downs. He was also a patient of Dr. Adams. He was also the brother-in-law of Amy War, who was also a patient of Dr. Adams. So 4 months before he passed away, he had broke his ankle and he ended up in a care home. Dr. Adams gave him a sedative which had morphine, which made Mr. Downs forget everything. And on the 7th of April 1955, Dr. Adams told the nurse to give James a tablet to make him more awake. 2 hours later, a solicitor arrived to make changes to Mr. Downs' will. Dr. Adams told the solicitor that he would inherit £1,000. Another doctor was asked to come to determine if Mr. Downs was alert. Sadly, on the 30th of May, 88-year-old Mr. James Brown passed away. After passing away, Dr. Adams yet again charged his estate for a further £216 for his care. Annie Shape. She would be Adams' last patient, and she also owned the guest house which Heidi and Claire, who were patients, lived, where patients were who were also patients as well, and lived in the guest house. 5 days before she passed away, Dr. Adams diagnosed her with having cancer of the cerebral cervix and prescribed her with morphine and pethidine. On the 15th of November, she sadly passed away, and Adams said her death was unexplained. Her body was cremated pretty fast, and before anyone could had a chance to investigate her unexplained death. Alfred John Hetty, 71-year-old, was also a patient of Dr. Adams. He told Mr. Hattie he needed an urgent operation, but Mr. Hattie went to another doctor for a second opinion, which he was told he didn't need the operation. But the strange thing is, he still was friends with Dr. Adams. In November 1950, Dr. Adams diagnosed him with cancer in his abdomen. An operation by a doctor called in from London was attempted, but something went wrong during the operation. 10 days later, Mr. whole abdomen burst. Mr. Adams and his partner in practice operated immediately and repaired the burst. In Dr. Adams' words, since Dr. Adams was giving Mr. Hutton a large dose of morphine, I am too full of dope to say anything sensible. Mr. said to one of his friends, Mr. heart problems, and then in March of 1956, a heart specialist that Mr. had been suffering from some type of heart trouble since childhood, and that the condition had now worsened. The specialist explained that Hutton would die within a few months and might die at any time. And on the 13th of March, he had a severe chest pain with a heart attack. He died the next morning in what Dr. Adams described was cerebral hemorrhage. Shortly after his death, Dr. Adams went to the chemist to get 10 cc's of hypomorphine solution in the name of Mr. containing 5 grams of morphine, and for the prescription to be backdated to previous dates. The police presumed this was to cover morphine Dr. Adams had given him from his own private supply. Mr. Hutton left Dr. Adams £500 in his will. In cross-examination during Dr. Adams' hearing, the defence forced an admission from the Crown's explained witness that Mr. Hutton died from coronary thrombosis. The trial. Dr. Adams was arrested on the 24th of November 1956. He was charged with 13 offences, which include false information on cremation certificate. They let him out on bail while investigations continue. On the 9th of December 1956, he was arrested and formally charged for the murder of Miss Molly. Detective Hammond had enough evidence to charge Dr. Adams with the murder of Miss Molly, Miss Miller, Mrs. Hutton, and Ms. Barman. Unfortunately, Dr. Adams would only be charged on one count of murder, which was Mrs. Molson's. By all the other information about the other murders and also Mr. Hutton's death could be used in court to show the pattern of deaths linked to Dr. Adams. On the 14th of January 1957, the hearing started and ended on the same day. It only took them 5 minutes to decide that Dr. Adams should be put on trial. The trial started on the 18th of March 1957. Now, if he's found guilty, Dr. Adams could face a death penalty. So the trial lasted 17 days. It was the longest trial for the time in the country, and the trial finished on the 9th of April 1957. It took 45 minutes to make the decision on the case. Unfortunately, the jury found Dr. Adams not guilty for the murder of Miss Smallin. Wow. The outcome. So after the trial, Dr. Adams resigned from the National Health Service, or the NHS. John Adams would return to court to face the other charges, which were 8 counts of forging prescriptions, 4 counts of putting false information on a crimination form, 3 offences under the Dangerous Drugs Act 1951. At least he was found guilty. At last he was found guilty. He had to pay £24,000 and also court costs of £457. He lost his licence to prescribe dangerous drugs, and on the 27th of November, Dr. Adams was struck off the medical register. This is where you'd think it would end. But no. On the 22nd of November 1961, he was allowed to practice medicine again as a general practitioner, GP, in Eastbourne again. If that wasn't bad enough, in July of 1962 he was allowed to prescribe dangerous drugs again. So on the 30th of June 1983, Dr. Adams had a fall, broke his hip. While he was in, he got a chest infection, and on the 4th of July 1983, at the age of 84, Dr. Adams, aka Dr. Death, passed away from a heart failure. After Dr. John Adams' death, his estate was worth, oh, this is hard to read, 402. His estate was worth 402,970,000. He was still getting money from his former patients right up till he died. Wow. And when you think back then, people trusted their GPs. Back then people wouldn't think that a GP would deliberately go out and hurt you. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but that just like really blows my mind. Back then people trust their GPs to look after them and that, and he took advantage to them. And even when he died, he was right up to the day he was dying, he was still getting money from his former patients right up to until he took his last breath. That's just like unbelievable. All I can say is my thoughts go out to the families, and like I say, I've got other cases that are more grimmer than this, I think I've got a nurse, a male nurse that killed a load of patients as well. But it's not just that. I've got other ones that this one's just like the tip of the iceberg. I would say this one's like, this one isn't as bad as some of the others. And I will put my hands up and say I am sorry if I butchered those poor people's names. I'm not good at pronouncing like weird surnames.
About you. So, here's a little about me. I'm Isaac Clement, but just call me Isaac. No need for formalities. Besides, in the park, we've got to watch each other's backs. Now, people think we're in the dinosaur game. The truth is, we're entertainers. And our headliners traveled 65 million years to make the show. So let's make it a good one. Look at an ostrich or emu, then look at this latest dinosaur, the Struthiomimus, and tell me you don't see a connection. This is one of the more bird-like dinosaurs that we've brought back from extinction. It literally has a beak instead of teeth. It's an herbivore that prefers to move in herds. Overall, a fantastic addition to the park.
here we go. This is the kind of news I've been waiting for. Due to your efforts, the rating of the park is up. I know you put a lot of work into it. Well, I assume you did. Regardless, give yourself a pat on the back, huh?